Greg, thank you so much. The next speaker will also be from the same Vatican agency, as I mentioned before, Philip Eubanks. He's a development associate, and he's accompanied by he's accompanied by two other development associates tonight, Thomas Moore and the third, and Alexandra Keenan. They're new folks in the agency, but I guess we're seen as important enough to bring half of the office here tonight. So with that, we invite Philip to come up. Philip you'll see his bio. I won't get into great details, except some of what he's going to talk to tonight is about his experience in a recent visit to Lebanon in terms of how he was moved by what he saw. He has some pictures for us and reflections. Thank you.
Can everyone hear me without the microphone?
Yes.
All right, then I am not going to use the microphone if that's okay. So this morning I was thinking a lot. There's that old quote that goes, and I couldn't remember if it was "No man is an island to himself" or "Every man is an island to himself." I just couldn't remember which it was, and I spent most of my day thinking about that quote. And somewhere in there, I had this vision of a map of each of us on an island. And I feel like in my own life, many times, I spend a lot of time maybe burning some bridges I shouldn't burn, maybe trying to build lots of bridges. Sometimes there's bridges that have been constructed and I've walked away and I've just sort of left them there, and then suddenly I decide to cross it again. But across all of my different relationships and all of the people that I encounter and I am connected to each and every day, I think what Catholic Near East Welfare Association is to me is an organization that gives me an opportunity to build a really big bridge, one that connects us here within our churches, within our families, with the people of the Eastern Catholic churches overseas, some of these oldest churches, the beginnings of Christianity. I'm going to talk a little bit about that tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit about my time that I spent in Lebanon back in April, and also near the Syrian border, where I encountered some of the work that we do with Catholic Near East. So we are a 90-year-old papal agency. We were founded by the Holy Father in 1926, and we work in several different locations: Eastern Europe, India, the Middle East, Northeast Africa. Tonight, I'm going to focus a little bit on the Middle East in particular and talk to you just about my time in Lebanon. But I did want to just highlight for you some of the different locations where we work. We have a regional office in Jerusalem, one in Beirut, one in Amman, and through our offices we operate in Syria, Iraq, Jordan, and we have a man on the ground in Egypt. Through all of that work, we offer everything from seminarian support. We have medical facilities, hospitals that we're running, often through religious orders, sisters who are doing amazing work. We're in schools and orphanages, and I got to see some of that firsthand. The Middle East is the focus area for tonight, in part because it's been the greatest humanitarian crisis, at least since World War II. It's a pretty big area, 258.5 million people, of which the Christian population is about 14.5 million. Our particular mandate, our special mandate that we have as an agency is to work with, for, and through the Eastern Catholic churches. Well, who are the Eastern Catholic churches? We've listed a few of them here, of the 22, 23 different churches, but it includes the Coptics, the Syriacs, not all of the Coptics, that's the Coptic Catholic, not the Coptic Orthodox. the Chaldeans in Iraq. I'm going to speak a little bit about Melkites and Maronites. The Maronite church is a larger church in Lebanon, primarily in Lebanon, and the Greek Melkite church also has a presence in Lebanon. I'm going to talk to you about some seminarians who are there. I also listed some Anglicans and Protestants. We have some partnerships with, for example, the Episcopal Church in Gaza is running a hospital, and we co-run that with them. But primarily we work specifically with the Eastern churches. So all of the pictures that you are going to see tonight are pictures that I took. I think that gives it a little oomph that I was there. This is a picture. These are children that I encountered. These are people that I encountered. This picture is probably one of the most powerful that I took, and it's a moment that I relive over and over, is being in a Syrian refugee camp in the Bekaa Valley. In particular, outside of Zakhle, I encountered these two children next to a tent in a refugee camp that was there, and I was deeply moved by their faces and by the things that the people in the camp had to say. But I was deeply moved by the way in which the Archdiocese of Zakhle was present in the camp. So whereas the UN from time to time might establish a camp, sometimes the UN isn't actually operating in the camp, sometimes it's the church. And in particular, it was the church that was walking with these people. We had installed the water that they had. A lot of these people will move into a camp and they're out in the middle of a field and they don't have access to water, they don't have access to electricity. We walked into some of the tents and saw firsthand that all these children had, were blankets for their bed on just a concrete slab. And it was this deeply moving experience where all I could think about was the struggle that they face. You have 1.5 million Syrians currently in the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon. Now let me put this into context for you. Lebanon is a country of 8 million people. This is about the size of New York, of New York City. So you have 1.5 million who have crossed over into Lebanon from Syria because of the civil war that's happening there. That's 1 in 5 people now are Syrian refugees in this area. Through Catholic Near East Welfare Association, we walk with, for, and through and help this community survive. And that was something that was incredible for me to see firsthand, was knowing that these kids would have a shot at a future through the schools that we were running, through the social centers that we had, and through the health care that we provide. I wanted to tell you a little bit about one of those social centers. This is kind of unique. I'll give you an example. So the UN might set up a school, and it's a good school. It accomplishes the purpose of education. But when the sisters, in particular Sister Amira here, who was part of the congregation, the Sisters of the Good Shepherd, when Sister Amira decided that she was going to set up a school, she wanted it to be more than just caring for the education. She wanted to care for every need that the kid had, recognizing that some of these kids had been in an environment where they had been bombed, where their families had been terrorized, whether that was by ISIS or just by the conflict that was happening through the Civil War. Sister Amira understood that before you can give a kid education, you've got to be able to provide a kid with trauma support. So what did she do? She hired a psychologist, she brought in a social worker, and she tended to the needs, not just of educating the kids, but making sure that they worked through some of the issues of the violence they'd encountered first and foremost. She told us a particular story about a young Syrian boy who was 9 years old, who just stopped coming to school one day. And a couple of days passed and she was getting worried. So Sister got in touch with the mother. And the mother said, well, you'll have to speak to the father. So sister got in touch with the father and began to guilt him. And she I know you care so much about your son's education. I'm curious why he hasn't been in class. And the father said, he's betrothed to be married at 9 to another little girl who was not in the class also. So sister just said, well, that's unacceptable. He needs to be in school. So you have a sister telling a father in a Middle Eastern culture, you need to get your son back in school. And the father did, and not only did he send the kids back to school, but he also began coming to the school as well, along with his wife, where they could do evening training courses. This is one of the really unique things about this school as well, is that the Sisters of the Good Shepherd made a real effort in what they were doing to make sure that in addition to offering a full family experience that makes sure the whole family was cared for, they were also hiring Syrian teachers to teach the Syrian curriculum and then also teaching the students English and French, because they were going to need that to be able to matriculate into the school system. She's an incredible woman. This was probably my most moving experience. I was a seminarian. I graduated from Vanderbilt Divinity School. And one of the things that we did as we traveled with our CEO, Monsignor Kozar, we ended up going to a Greek Melkite seminary, St. Anne's Major Seminary. And it was this fascinating experience. We got to hear the seminarians chant in Aramaic, the language of Jesus. And as we listened to them, it was this deeply moving experience. And we sat down with them to have a dialogue. We wanted to know about their experience being in the seminary. We wanted to hear what it was that they felt their concerns were facing the Middle East. One of the neat things about this was that while this was a seminary that was in Lebanon, it included seminarians who were from Palestine and Jordan, and there were a few that were from, I think 1 or 2 who were from Iraq, and then there was a couple that were from Syria. We got to talk mostly with the seminarians who were from Syria, and as they spoke with us, one of the things that they had to say was, that really blew us away, was to talk about their desire to finish as quickly as possible so that they could return to their war-torn homes. One of them, in fact, had come from a town of nearly 65,000 before the war. It's now a town of 500, a village, of which about 230 or so were Christian. And he spoke about his desire to go home and be with the people and be with the community. And he said to Monsignor Kozar, please help us get trauma training so that we can go back and that we can offer pastoral care to this hurting community. And then another Syrian seminarian mentioned a similar thing. He talked a little bit about how he also was eager to go back, but his struggle and the thing that he was trying to figure out what he was going to do was that he recognized that in his hometown, a lot of the Christian community had taken up arms and were preparing to fight. And he was troubled by this, and he wanted to know, and he posed the question, how do I go back and say to this community that's hurting, that's angry, that we need to forgive, that we need to offer a third way, a different way, not to continue the violence, but how do I go back and say to this community, we need to offer the way of Jesus to love? And the fact that he was willing, that he had the courage to want to go back into this community that's still torn, and to be able to ask those questions and be with and walk with the people absolutely blew me away. But that's the work that we're doing. That's the impact that we're having. Finally, I wanted to tell you about this little girl. This is at the Fratelli Association. It's another school. It's down in a place called Saida. You know Saida. It's you might have heard of when Jesus went to Sidon and Tyre. Sidon is now called Saida. And so we went down to Saida at the Fratelli Association, which is co-run by the Marist Fathers and the LaSallians. And the Marist Father who's there is a Mexican brother who has flown over to Lebanon to help Syrian refugees. When he showed up in Lebanon, he said, well, I've been tasked to start a school. I don't really know what to do. What should I do? Well, we got in touch with our regional office, and we said, well, you know what? We know some sisters in the Bekaa Valley, the Good Shepherd sisters. We're going to put you in touch with them. And so we got in touch with them, and they ended up modeling their program off of what Sister Amira was doing because it was so well run. So that's one of the ways in which our regional offices are really making the important connections between people, right? Building those bridges. One of the things that blew me away, though, is that as we were touring this school, this little girl came up to me. It was their lunchtime, and she saw that I didn't have food. She wanted to make sure that I had something to eat. It's funny when we talk about welcoming the stranger, we often think of the strangers as being them, and we're the ones that...
The stranger.
Yeah. And it was completely reverse. For me, in this experience, she was the one welcoming me. I was the stranger. And I think that was something that was really powerful for me to realize, is that, you know, the world's bigger than me. To be on the ground in the places that we serve and see that actually this little girl was serving me. She was serving my soul. And so tonight, one of the things that we wanted to be able to do, there's a sign-up sheet over here. If you'd like to learn more about our work, this is just a short little blip. Our magazines are on the table. We do have just a little informational about Syria and sort of an overview of what's happening in the Middle East and where Christians are. But if you'd like to learn more, please do sign up. One of my colleagues will be happy to help you with that at the end of the evening. And thank you so much.